Welcome to the Zen of Reffing Roller Derby Lesson 7. Referees, all positions. I'm Axis of Stevel, the author of this training manual. I'm filming this on May 20th, 2018. The content of this presentation is up to date as of this recording. Should this video become obsolete or replaced by a newer version, I'll place on the link on the screen to where you can find more information. And as always, you can find the latest version of the full training manual at www.tinyearl.com/zenreffing. Quick disclaimer: the WFTDA, MRDA, and JRDA are not responsible for the content in the training manual or this presentation, nor do they make any claims as to the accuracy of its content. Now, Lesson 7. We're going to be talking about, for the next few lessons, the various referee positions, but I want to start today specifically talking about all positions, things that referees all have in common, regardless of where they're specifically stationed during a game. Now, as you may remember in Lesson 1, I said the duties of a referee are to maintain safety, protect game flow, penalize illegally gained advantage, and establish an atmosphere of fairness. I want to dive a little more into detail on this in this lesson. Now, let's just talk specifically about more exact things that referees are doing. Number 1, before a game, referees assist with setting up the track. Now, this varies to league. At one of my leagues, I'm dual affiliated with 2 leagues, and at one of my leagues, it's customary the referees supervise and basically put together the track themselves. They certainly will ask for help from others, but referees are in charge. Getting the track done is the referee's duty. At my other league, the skaters take on that responsibility. The referees will supervise. The head referee, for example, will give a check to verify that everything is in order with the track setup, but the skaters are ultimately responsible for setting it up. The culture of your league will vary in how this is done, but generally speaking, referees assist with setting up the track. Referees attend pre-game and halftime officials meetings. These are important because not only is the pre-game meeting, for example, an opportunity for the referees and NSOs who may not have worked together to get to know each other, it's also an opportunity for the head referee and the head NSO to basically set common standards and protocols between all the referees. There are certain things that referees do differently, or certain things you may not be aware of for a specific game. For example, is there a deaf or hard of hearing skater? Are they just slightly hard of hearing, or are they profoundly deaf? How you handle the the exact context of what you have in a game will affect what needs to be discussed and what accommodations need to be worked out in a different game or in different games. Referees during a game will call out penalties as observed. If a referee is in doubt on a call, a penalty must not be called. The benefit of the doubt always goes to the skater, and you will oftentimes find that skaters, other skaters will get unhappy, like, hey, that's person forearmed me out of bounds, you didn't call it. And yes, it sucks. We can't call it if we don't see it, but on the flip side, that skater will be mollified by knowing sometimes karma is on their side, and they get away with doing something illegal because the referees couldn't see it. If intent must be inferred but is not clear, legal intent must be presumed. So, that the skater came up there and, yeah, it was definitely a forearm, but I'm not entirely certain that if she was, intending to really whack her out of bounds on purpose, which could potentially be an expulsion if that's going into, egregious levels there, or if this was, okay, it was a little rough, but it wasn't intentional and such. Intent can play into a number of different calculations. Some penalties require intent, most do not, but if you cannot ascertain intent, if you're not certain that something was intentional, legal intent is presumed. And finally, as we said before in the verbal cues lesson, always use this format when issuing a penalty. Whistle, tweet, because that's the long whistle there, hand signal, color, number spelled out, penalty. So I'm going to be like, tweet, blue 3-3 back block. We also echo jam call-off whistles and hand signals. So, for example, at the end of the jam, the skater is calling off the jam. All the referees will begin calling off the jam as well. Basically, we echo the hand signal over there, and we echo the whistles as we talked about during the lesson on whistles. Now, I'm simplifying a little bit. There is an exception that one or both of the jam referees may not be using hand signals as well. We'll go into that later in the lesson on jammer referees. But for now, it's enough to understand that generally speaking, all referees will echo the jam call-off whistles and hand signals. Referees will call official timeouts as necessary to protect safety and proper gameplay. This could be a variety of different things. This could be an injured skater on the track. We call an official timeout so we can address that. This could also be, and I've seen this not often, but sometimes, that the teams are getting very angry with each other, and they're beginning to hit much, much harder than is necessary, and the referees are getting concerned that this is going to escalate very badly. So a referee, the head referee, for example, might call a timeout, official timeout, and the referees gather, and the head referee just says, we're just going to give them a minute to just calm down, like that. Just like in some games, the one team might call a timeout because the other is just on a roll, and they just want to kind of interrupt that mental processing that they're doing, that flow that the other team has that's working in their favor. We will sometimes, as referees, call a timeout because we want to interfere with the flow of increasing aggression going on in a game. That will happen. There's plenty of other reasons for official timeouts, whether it be track repair, there's lots of different things that have to do with safety and gameplay. We participate in official reviews. Now, if you're not familiar with roller derby, each team gets one per half. An official review is basically an opportunity they can call a special timeout in which they can challenge a call or a lack of call. Basically, an officiating decision. It's usually a call, could be other things as well. But they're challenging the call or lack of call during the prior jam or the lineup time for the prior jam. And they want to state their argument on the way they believe something should have been enforced, and then ask the referees to go off and discuss it. Maybe 20% of the time they win, maybe a little more. I've never done a study on this, but it's not uncommon for them to win, particularly with newer and lower skilled referees that are more apt to miss things or to swallow their whistle and just be a little afraid and not call the penalty, even though they think they saw it. But, sometimes there's enough that when all the referees start talking about an action that they're like, oh, okay, actually, now that we're all talking, we do have sufficient information to issue the penalty that they requested, although in the jam maybe we didn't. It's also common for official reviews to challenge scoring decisions. I believe that skater scored 4 points, not 2. Or I think their team only scored 2 and not 4. That would be an example of something that's not penalty related. We call off jams early if necessary for safety. We talked about this a bit in the last lesson. Lesson 5 actually we talked about this in. You may call off a jam early for some sort of minor injury. But there's also, safety can also include skater equipment failure. A penalty that's giving one side an unfair advantage. For example, the jammer, drops the jammer's helmet cover falls on the floor, so I pick it up and I fling it out into the audience, for example. So they're going to, even safety of the audience aside, it's going to take their jammer quite a while to go get their cover back. I have gotten an unfair advantage. Or maybe I throw it to where they can't even retrieve it. That doesn't mean the other team can't score points for the next 2 minutes. So yes, certain unfair advantages we'll call up the jam for. Nearby emergency, like somebody in the audience is having a heart attack. Certainly we can stop play and let the EMTs run and go deal with that. Spectator interference. You got fans that are kind of getting near the track. They're walking in the safety lane. Because remember, this is may call it off for. This is not necessarily you absolutely have to call it for. So the fans are beginning to walk in the safety lanes where they're not supposed to be. You use your context. If there are no skaters anywhere near that and they're not in any immediate danger, you might let them walk and hope they get out of the way. But if you see, the pack is rapidly coming towards them and potentially there's danger, then that's an issue. Spills or debris on the track. For example, if a referee can just grab it real quick before the skaters get there, great. You don't have to call off the jam. If it's potentially becoming an issue, then yes, then you call off the jam. Now, what we always call off the jam for are, for example, injuries that present an immediate danger. You've got a skater who's unresponsive on the track, for example. If the pack goes past them, somebody's going to just skate right over this person. They're in immediate danger. technical or mechanical difficulties. You're in the middle of a game in a gymnasium, and suddenly the basketball, like backboard and net, which has been raised up, decides it's going to go, like lower down, like onto the track or something, So these are written very vaguely and generally because they're trying to give you a great deal of leeway in the context. If there's some sort of technical or mechanical something, then you could certainly, stop a jam in progress. Venue malfunction, including power outage, and yes, by the way, I have heard of games where they're playing in the evening and just boom, the power goes out and they're instantly in the dark. We call it the jam at that point. Fighting, two skaters get into a fist fight. Yeah, we're going to call off a jam, and that's fortunately extremely rare, but it's not unheard of in Derby. Physical interference by anyone not in a jam, including fans on the track. Very rare, but on occasion, this happens in like some venues. We do not end a game when the period clock reaches 0. We let the jam finish, but sometimes they're using a scoreboard that makes a big buzzer, they're also using the venue scoreboard and makes a big, and people are used to basketball or hockey or something where the game ends, and sometimes fans will suddenly just race out on the track when that happens. Obviously, we can call it. We can end the jam at that point because now there's danger. The pack's coming around. There's 50 people standing on the track. This could also be interference by skaters or coaches or something. People that really shouldn't be out there, but they come out and they start interfering. Again, we talked about like the picking up of the jammer cover and like throwing it somewhere. Well, if the jammer cover is dropped and so the jammer's like, okay, I'm just going to do another lap and grab it on the way around. But on the way around, somebody from the bench decides to run in, grab the jammer cover, and then run away with it or something. Well, physical interference by someone not in a jam. We can certainly, halt a jam for that. Now, some duties between jams and at jam start. These are things that you should do. You need to communicate penalties from the prior jam with the penalty tracker as necessary. Let me explain what this means. The roller derby gets very loud. We have a lot of noise going on, a lot of whistles going, and it even gets louder with more and more whistles going crazy as a jam is being called off. So, for example, jam's being called off. You got all the referees going tweet, and except for the one referee that's basically trying to call a penalty and call someone on cut track that they did, 2 seconds before the jam ended, but the skater might not be aware that they cut because they can't pick out the one whistle and the referee yelling over the sound of the jam being called off. So, you direct that skater, you make sure the skater knows they have a penalty, skaters go into the box. But we also have a non-skating official, an NSO, whose job is the penalty tracker. They're writing down penalties, and they may not have heard this. So between jams, one of the duties, and this is like one of my major pet peeves as a referee, is the people that call a penalty as the jam is being called off or between jams, but don't make sure the penalty tracker gets it. Sometimes errors in roller derby, if somebody makes a mistake, like a procedural mistake, like not making sure the penalty tracker has it, it creates a cascading series of errors. For example, maybe the skater did go to the box, the next jam begins, but the penalty tracker is immediately like, I don't believe that person's supposed to be in the box, mentions it to the head referee. Head referee's like, yeah, go ahead and, let's bring that person out of the box. So the person is now released early from the box, which causes the referee issued the call on the last jam to go, no, they were supposed to be in the box. They go order the person back to the box. And now you got a skater like going back and forth that has no idea what's supposed to be going on. It's really, really sloppy, bad officiating when that happens. And one of the ways we can avoid this is by doing things by procedure, by the books. A good game, like an NSO crew in a game is a little bit like a crew on a submarine. If you ever watch like The Hunt for Red October, one person gives an order and the next person relays it and relays it, and there's basically like people like echoing all over the place, like the orders, it's going through 2 or 3 people because they're making sure that it's getting addressed and everybody's aware and they're communicating this to other people. Our NSO system and referees kind of work much the same way. And there's redundancy built in, but the penalty trackers may be communicating certain things with the penalty box. Referees, we need to make sure the penalty tracker gets it. We want to be orderly about this. So make sure those penalties between jams or as like a jam is ending, make sure that's getting communicated to the penalty tracker. Another thing we do at jam start, we watch for false starts. False starts are a skater who is starting in both a legal and illegal starting position simultaneously. For example, blockers must start between the jammer line and the pivot line. But if that blocker's wheel rolls back behind the pivot line, their skate just kind of goes a little bit back and they're not even aware of it, they are now false starting. And because they are basically potentially gaining an advantage from being in that partially illegal starting position. And we'll talk about how to handle false starts in a later lesson, but this is something that we have to watch for. You also watch for skaters that are entering the track at jam start. The moment that whistle blows, that's when we determine who's on the track and who's off. If a skater is not fully in bounds at track start, then they're considered out of bounds and we send them back to the bench. So we watch for that. We watch for early hitting, or as a jam ends, we watch for late hitting. These early hits and late hits are penalties that involve engagement when the jam is not in progress. Early hit refers to jams as everybody's like lining up for a jam. Late hit refers to skaters basically hitting after the jam's been called off, like as everybody's like exiting the track. On occasion, it could be intentional, like or somebody who's, for example, they're just pissed off and they just go launch a shoulder block 10 seconds after a jam ends. That's actually very rare. Most of the time, they're not trying to be a jerk about it. They just got caught up. They haven't recognized the jam is ending, and they just went to hit that hit, and they were like 2 seconds too late. And they really should have known better, and they can get a penalty for that. Early hitting can also happen with skaters that are like lining up, and a skater wants to kind of like nudge somebody out of the way and sort of take their position, and so you start getting like jostling and pushing, and a little jostling we understand, and again, I'll go into this in another lesson later on, but if a skater is actually going and engaging in a small block to push someone out of the way to take their position, that is not allowed. This can happen, by the way, before even the first jam of the game. I did have a game once when the skaters were lining up for the first jam, and in comes one of the pivots for one of the teams, and she's skating facing, she's skating backwards. She's facing that way as she's going, and she's skating in, and she's putting her pivot cover on. She's talking to her bench, and she just skates backwards until she bumps into an opposing player. That opposing player then stepped, to hold her balance, stepped behind the jammer line. That is a classic example of an early hit. She forced this person into a, basically partially illegally starting position. That would warrant a penalty. Now, you have a little leeway here because sometimes skaters, like especially before a game, they're just kind of standing around and they're not really holding a position. They're all just standing in a group kind of chit-chatting. And if somebody bumps someone in that particular case, I'm not going to worry about it because they haven't claimed a position on the track. In this particular case, the other team was sort of like lined up. They were ready to go. They had staked their position, and she went and erroneously or accidentally bumped into her, forcing her partially out of that position into an illegal starting position. That weren't a penalty. I gave a penalty to that person. She started in the box, and that pivot was not very happy about that, but it warranted a penalty, and she started the game in the penalty box. We watch for too many skaters. Now, this includes too many pivots, too many jammers, etc. This is actually a very easy area for officiating error, where multiple referees should be at the beginning of every jam counting the skaters on the track. Do they have one jammer, and do they have no more than 4 blockers, of which one can be a pivot? Great, that's all in order, for one of the teams. Oh, but we forgot to check the penalty box. They've actually got another jammer in the box, or they've got another blocker in the box and such. So then we have to warn the team that they have too many skaters, and so that one of those skaters can get off the track. It is very easy to miscount because teams will sometimes get confused and they send an extra player on, or not enough players, or it's like 5 seconds till the jam starts. They realize they're short of players, so 2 players come racing onto the track just so they'll at least have somebody. So this is something we need to watch for. Basically, keep an eye on that count to make sure we get it right. Another thing between jams or jam start, you bring major issues to the attention of the head referee. You will notice things sometimes that the head referee does not notice. Maybe they checked, but then something happened. A track repair issue might be a classic example. It could also be the EMTs are now attending to somebody in the audience. Someone in the audience maybe fainted or something, and so the EMTs have wandered off to go attend to them. and now suddenly you don't have any medics watching the game. That's a major issue. We're required to have at least one medic watching play at all times, and if the medics are busy with somebody who fainted, then we need to halt the game until we can have one medic, paying attention again. Anything you see that is potentially a major issue, a skater who's lining up for a jam, or a skater who's you believe their equipment is no longer acceptable. Maybe you've noticed a giant crack in their gear, or anything you believe which is a major issue, bring it to the attention of the head referee if you are not confident that you can deal with it yourself. Referees, we provide warnings for technical infractions. We talked a minute ago about too many skaters and false starts. Those are like classic examples of technical infractions we'll provide warnings for. We also will warn about missing skating numbers. For example, a skater's lining up for a jam, they don't have a number on their arm. We can certainly give them a warning that, hey, after the jam, I need you to fix that, or your number's fading, you need to make that more readable. There are other things as well. Now, if something is a potential safety issue, we deal with it immediately. You see a skater lining up and they've got safety pins for some reason holding their a torn uniform together. That's a safety issue. We deal with that immediately. So warnings can basically give them a little time. It could be telling them to deal with it immediately. It will vary according to which warning we're given. The one thing all warnings have in common, we do not provide warnings to the teams after the 5-second pre-jam announcement. So by that I mean when the jam timer goes 5 seconds, holds their hand way up, because that 5 seconds is too easy for confusion to have impact on the game. So if we say, 5 seconds, and then we say, blue team, too many skaters, blue team, you have 5 blockers or whatever, they might go, oh, and have 2 people leave the track, and then suddenly the jam starts, and now 2 of them are out of bounds, and they're now playing with 3 blockers because those 2 can't return to the track. So for that 5 seconds there, we don't give any warnings. We will simply wait until the jam starts, then we will address whatever it is. A final duty, this is low priority. We address non-officials, minor issues, questions, requests as your time and your duties allow. You have duties between jams. That 30 seconds is not vacation. You're watching the track, you're watching for false starts, you're checking the bench, you're counting the skater numbers. There's a lot you're doing. But you're also, if you have the time and the ability, if a coach comes running and says, hey, what was that penalty that you gave so-and-so in the last jam? Certainly answer their question. Be a little wary that sometimes they're asking questions that cannot be quickly answered. So they're going to try to, why did you give a false start? Or I'm sorry, why did you give like a forearm penalty to the skater in that jam? Well, yes, but isn't the... They're going to start arguing with you. You don't have time for this. And you can simply say, I apologize, I don't have time for this. You can speak to the head referee. So, as a referee, especially as a new one, feel free to upgrade problems to a head referee. If you're confused, you're not totally sure how to deal with something, you'll need to speak to the head referee about that. Would you like to speak to the head referee? Would you like me to summon the head referee? Send them to the head referee, dump it on them because they have more training and they're ready to deal with it more. Now, some little tips and reminders here. Skaters, bench staff, spectators, etc., they will aggravate you. Sometimes they will do this on purpose. Some skaters and coaches have gotten very good at getting in the head of referees, and they will come up and they will start challenging you right from the beginning of the game, particularly jammer referees and the head referee. They will challenge them after every jam, in part because they want to see what they're made out of. They want to see, can I push you around? Can I intimidate you to the point where now you're afraid to penalize my team, or you're going to just give me what I want with scoring rather than argue with me. So they will come after the player, sometimes somewhat aggressively. They even respectfully can be done in an aggravating fashion. It is not an illegal action for a skater to aggravate a referee. It is an illegal action for them to be abusive to a referee, but those are 2 very different things. Any response that you give skaters, audience, bench staff, etc., should be professional and done within the rules of the game. The more angry or the more upset, the more they're getting in their head, the more they're making your hand shake, the more professional you need to come. Fall back on your training and just calm. Just keep a cold, calm face. Do not let them get to you. And I admit, they have gotten through to me on occasion. I had a referee that came in, a coach came in screaming at the top of his lungs at me one time, and I pointed at him and was like, you are not to ever use that tone of voice with me again. Do you understand me? That was not the best response on my part. But better response on my part would have been simply listen for a moment and say, all right, are you done? Good, thank you. Your captain is going to receive an insubordination penalty for your abusive manner during that. If you'd like to avoid this in the future, all of your dealings with me must be done in a calm and respectful fashion. Do you understand? We don't have to make them happy, but we do have to remain professional when we deal with them. And that's surprisingly difficult to do sometimes. Another reminder, referees are not coaches. Our duty is to ensure fair play, not to assist a team or an individual skater. One of my earliest lessons as a referee I learned was with a game I went to where a team was just obliterating the other team by, 250, 300 points or something. And I started getting lax on penalizing the team that was losing simply because they were just being beat so badly. And I was very new and I was very rookie at the time. And the other team called me on it. They basically said, hey, you're not calling penalties. They're doing illegal things and you're not calling them. It sucks to be in a game that's kind of a blowout, that's just a totally unfair matchup, and one team gets obliterated, but it doesn't matter. If you agree to officiate a game, even though you didn't know it was going to be a blowout, we officiate that to the best of our abilities. We are strictly neutral, strictly impartial. Who's winning or who's losing doesn't matter in terms of how we're going to enforce our penalties. We are always trying to do the best job we can to do this. We want fair play. We don't want to make it a good game. We don't want a good game in terms of like a close score. That's not how we adjust our metrics for penalties. We want fairness, impartiality. We do not assist teams or individual skaters. Referees, you need to wear safety gear at all times while standing on skates. Now, I hope you got the gist of that during our safety gear lesson. But this is very important. There are referees that will unclip their helmet and skate around before a game begins or something. This is very unprofessional. The general rule, at all times when you are standing on skates, you must wear your safety gear. If you take that off, if you start being lax and you're skating down the hallway to the bathroom holding your wrist guards or something, you are losing your moral authority to hold a high level of behavior, a high level of safety in other people as well. Now, there are two exceptions to this. Number one, you may remove your helmet during the national anthem. That is allowed. The insurance companies have specifically said, we accept that as an acceptable risk. So during the national anthem, you may stand, you may remove your helmet. Second, just like skaters, referees are not required safety gear that provides no medical benefit. So if you're missing your left hand, you don't have to wear a wrist guard on it. It's the same standard for skaters and referees in that. And finally, as far as the number and the positions of referee goes, as currently set in the WIFTA Officiating Guide to Standard Practices, I think I'm getting that name right. The document has changed names a couple times over the years, but it's basically our standard practices document, what we do as referees, what is standard. We have 7 referees in a full crew. We have 2 inside pack referees. They work inside the track, watching the pack itself. We have 2 jammer referees, one watching each jammer, basically in charge of watching scoring, penalties to and from the jammer. We also have 3 outside pack referees, 3 referees working on the outside, providing coverage in the pack. We're going to talk more about each of these positions in subsequent lessons. I want to make one final discussion here on the scope of officiating. Specifically, I want you to notice what we have not covered. When do we begin and end officiating at a game? For example, if a skater swears at a referee during a game, we're going to give them a penalty for this. But what about if they swear at a referee during warm-ups for the games? Whenever the skaters are just kind of, going on warm-up for a game. Does it make a difference if the referee is in uniform or not in uniform? What about if they swear at a referee during the intros for the game? So now everybody's in uniform and everybody's there, but the game hasn't technically begun. What about if a skater crashes the pre-game officiating meeting and drops in and is abusive to a referee or something, or abusive swearing or abusive or something in front of basically all the other officials? Are we on duty then? There are not obvious answers to this. WIFTA JRDA, MRDA, they are struggling as organizations to really define what the scope of officiating is. Where do our duties begin? Where do our duties end? At what point during a game do we step in and prevent a skater from participating if they have a moderate injury but is not immediately dangerous? For example, I was working a game when a skater, she broke her tailbone, so she played with an ice pack. Basically, she slid down her shorts and back. It's not immediately dangerous. It's quite painful. I'm sure she was not liking life very much. But do we tell that skater they cannot play, or do we not? We're not medical doctors. I really couldn't tell you what the impact of attempting to play a game with a broken tailbone is, other than they're probably going to scream if they fall on their ass. Do we allow this, or do we not? I really don't know. At what point do we bar a skater from participating in the jam due to skate failure? We talked in the lesson on skates about what about if a skater's truck breaks and now they're on 6 wheels instead of 8? Do we order them out of the jam? Do we allow them to continue? I said at the time that I prefer erring on the side of safety, but there are many referees who disagree with me and think that that is the skater's prerogative to make that decision. That is not ours. There's no right or wrong answer here. This is an ongoing debate that has not yet been solved. How would we handle skaters not wearing their safety gear during warm-ups? How would we handle them not wearing their safety gear between jams? What if they're, like they take their mouth guard out between jams on the way to the box? They're not in active gameplay. Does that fall under our authority or doesn't it? It's a little vague. What about if they're in during a jam and they take their helmet off, but they're actually in the bench area and they're not participating in the jam itself? Do we regulate that? What if they leave the bench area during a jam progress and they're skating down a hallway going back to their locker room and they take their wrist guards off? Does that fall under our authority? At some point, our authority ends in a game and skaters become personally responsible for themselves, but the exact line of demarcation is not clear. It is my hope that in the future there will be additional documents or additional guidance provided to officials on this, and I will gladly update this lesson when the time comes. Until then, talk to other referees. See what they say. Judge things on a case-by-case basis and assume that no decision made during one game sets precedent for the next, because there's no right or wrong on a lot of these decisions here. It's just a matter of how many officials are going to enforce a decision in a particular manner. That concludes my lesson on referees in all positions. We'll be back next time to discuss outside pack referees. Thank you.